But first, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Gary Waddell, our superintendent, to offer a greeting this evening.
Thank you, Brad. We'd like to welcome you all this evening for our webinar on phone-free schools. This policy conversation really began in response to AB 3216, the Phone-Free Schools Act, which Governor Newsom signed last fall. And at that point, Mr. Stamm and others convened a working group to begin to flesh out what this might look like for Santa Clara Unified. And you're going to hear some of that journey this evening. There's been a lot of input from parents, student, teachers, what this might look like for Santa Clara Unified. And we're very fortunate to have, as Mr. Stamm commented, our friends from San Mateo High School District who have a little experience with this to be with us this evening and impart some of their wisdom. So thank you for being here. We really want to get your questions and hear your thoughts about this before this goes to our policy subcommittee. And I will turn it back over to Brad Stamm, who's our Chief Academic and Innovation Officer, and also Jennifer DeRico, our Director of Communication and Community Engagement, will be hosting this evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Waddell, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening and is continuing to join us. Before we get started into the content, I want to turn it over to Jennifer DeRico to share a little bit about translation services and also how you can submit your questions this evening.
Thank you, Brad. Good evening. As Dr. Waddell shared, my name is Jennifer DeRico. I'm the Director of Communications and Community Engagement for Santa Clara Unified School District. It's my pleasure to join Mr. Stamm tonight as one of your co-hosts, and you'll see me a little bit later on in the hour helping with the Q&A portion of the evening, but I'd like to allow our Spanish interpreter tonight, Ms. Catherine Hertel, to unmute her microphone and turn on her camera to share about our translation services available tonight.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Catherine Hertel, soy intérprete del Distrito Escolar. El día de hoy le voy a estar ayudando con la interpretación en español. Por favor, para escuchar esta sesión en español, oprima el botón que dice Interpretación en su pantalla y seleccione el lenguaje en español. Este menú también con este menú también puede seleccionar la opción de silenciar el audio original en inglés. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And as we go through the panel presentation this evening, you are welcome to use the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar, a tool found at the bottom if you're watching on your computer, where you can enter in your questions as you move along. Mr. Stamm and I will be looking at those questions as we move through. We'll make sure that the questions that aren't being answered through the presentation in our panel will be shared at the end of the presentation. And Ms. Hertel will be working with us on the back end. So if we have Spanish speakers, you are welcome to share your question in Spanish, and we will absolutely get to your question this evening. Mr. Stamm?
Thank you. And can we advance the slides, please? 3 slides. One more. One more. One more. Okay, thank you. So here's our agenda. We had the welcome and some initial introductions. We'll introduce the panelists a little bit later. We are going to start with a little bit of framing about the challenge that we're facing, or the why for what we're doing, and then share with you the outlines of our proposed phone-free campus policy, and then a video on how Yondr pouches work. And then we'll have our panelist discussion, and then any Q&A questions that audience members have submitted into the chat. To the extent that we have time remaining, we will address those. And then anything that we're not able to address should be covered in a very extensive FAQ section being launched, that will be launched next week on our webpage. And we do have a whole website and webpage devoted to this under the family section. So with the next slide. So I don't think it's a secret. People have read and heard articles about this, podcasts, TV shows, related to the challenges that today's students are facing. The epidemic of anxiety, digital distractions, and they're calling the doom scroll generation, where students' rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation have increased. There's some questions about what do we do? How do we address this? Next slide, please. Here is some of the research showing the role that cell phones have played in relation to student academic performance. One thing that really surprised me was finding that it takes actually 20 minutes for students to regain focus after a nearby cell phone distraction, and this can be as little as a beep or a buzz from a phone. We've seen a decrease in mathematics scores by students when distracted by phones, and this is from the PISA data, so this is also international data. If students are using social media for 3 or more hours, it doubles anxiety and depression risk for young people. And almost 70% of students report that electronic devices are distracting to them. But we're in a sort of a situation of collective helplessness because everyone's using them. And so even though students and adults and teachers are recognizing that this is a problem, there hasn't really been a systematic response to it until now. And that's what we'll be talking about. Next slide, please. So what's been happening is that regulation of cell phones has been expanding across the United States and also across the world. Several states have instituted school phone bans: Arkansas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Indiana. As Dr. Waddell mentioned, the state passed last year AB 3216, which is requiring schools to develop policies to severely restrict or ban school phone use during the school day. And right now, 75% of public schools have some form of restriction on cell phone use during school hours. But there are differences in the level of the restriction, which I'll come back to in just a minute. Next slide, please. Dr. Waddell mentioned the work group of parents, students, teachers, administrators, and classified staff who came together beginning in October and have been meeting monthly in response to the request by the board that proposed updates to their policy be put into place in response to the state law, but also that reflect current research findings and a solution that shows evidence of successful implementation in similar districts to Santa Clara Unified. So the work group has developed recommended updates to the board policy and has also written an administrative regulation for the board connected to this policy, because we did not have an administrative regulation. And that's typically the how-to that accompanies board policies. And the work group, looking around for successful examples of implementation, found San Mateo High School, and has now taken multiple visits to San Mateo High School to learn what they've been doing and how it's working for them. Next slide, please. So one thing that they did learn, that we have learned, is that while cell phone bans are in place in over 3/4 of schools, many are sort of rhetorical, and that there's not necessarily systematic implementation on a school-wide level. And one, Jonathan Haidt, who's a famous writer, author, social psychologist, wrote The Anxious Generation, some of you may have read or heard about, said that in many cases, it's not really a ban, it's more of an unenforceable wish. And we have evidence right now in our district here in Santa Clara, where there's a high degree of variation in the extent to which phones and other devices are restricted from classroom to classroom, depending really on teacher-based rules or teacher interpretation of those rules. And so what the work group decided to look at was something that could be applied more systemically, more thoroughly, and more successfully than what's currently happening in the district. And that's where we came upon this concept of lockable pouches, also going under the name of Yonder, which is the company that produces these pouches, and what San Mateo High School District is using. And another feature of the successful implementation, next slide, please, is something called a bell-to-bell policy. And what that means is that phones and other devices, such as smartwatches, earbuds, or soon smart glasses, if they are brought to school, would be locked in pouches once the first period bell rings, at the beginning of the instructional day. And it will be locked away during the entire instructional day, and will not be used during passing periods, breaks, or lunch, and will be unlocked at the end of the instructional day, so after the last bell rings. And I think it'll be easier to get an idea of what this looks like in practice by watching this short video. So Joe, if you could roll the video, that would be great.
Educators around the world are seeing the damaging effects of phones on student engagement, social development, and mental health.
Cell phones have been linked to many of the district's recent problems.
Texting, tweeting.
Cases of anxiety and depression.
Bullying, staging fights, and filming fights.
In an effort to crack down on cell phone usage, the district piloted these magnetic locking bags called Yonder.
It's an easy solution for a generation in the midst of a mental health crisis.
Yonder is the established leader in creating phone-free schools. For over 10 years, our product and program has allowed students to experience the focus, creativity, and relief that comes from a phone-free school day. As students enter school, they place their phone in their assigned Yonder pouch. They close and secure their pouch, keeping it with them throughout the day. When leaving school, students tap their pouch on an unlocking base to retrieve their phone. Yonder is used by millions of students every day across 26 countries. Our school partners report having more teaching time in the classroom, improved student safety and wellness, better student engagement, student behavior, and academic performance. Creating Phone-Free Schools is a community initiative. Our comprehensive program provides support to our school partners from start to finish with step-by-step guidance, parent communication materials, policy development, and proven expertise to ensure everyone understands the difference a phone-free education can make.
It's amazing to see kids come to school and not have to worry about that phone going off or them being bullied by someone else on social media.
It was kind of annoying at first, but then I saw like the difference between like my old school and this school.
I see more people like interacting rather than being on their phones, like especially at lunchtime and break time.
They are way more engaged, everyone's happier.
It's night and day. I saw kids' faces again.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. And don't forget, if you do have questions, please put your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them. So just again, to reiterate, the students will receive their Yonder pouches at the beginning of the year, and they are lockable, and you'd store your phones, smartwatches, and other personal mobile devices in there. You will turn off or set your phones to do not disturb mode, place them in the Yonder pouches and lock the pouches. The students can lock the pouches themselves. The pouches stay with the students all day, and the phones and devices remain locked in those pouches during passing periods, breaks, and lunch. And then at last bell, students unlock their pouches on the Yonder magnets. All the teachers have their own magnets. There are magnets in the office, and there may be magnets placed at other strategic locations around the campus, so it's easy to do. And then There may be certain school-sponsored events where students may have to repouch their devices, but that is up to the individual school, and that would be announced far in advance. And I'll ask our panelist friends to speak a little bit to that as well. Next slide, please. One question that comes up a lot is, what about exceptions to the rules? So Ed Code, California Education Code, actually requires that we have certain exceptions to that. So obviously, in the case of an emergency or in response to a perceived threat of danger. Also, a teacher, administrator, or district employee may grant the student permission to unlock their phone and provide them with the means to do so in order to use their phone for some purpose. There are even examples of teachers who have their students take out their phones to use a particular app in class or complete a project, but then they must be repouched and relocked before they leave the classroom at the end of that period. Obviously, some students may have medical needs or exemptions, and so they carry a special card for that. And then also, if it may be required by the student's individualized education plan or Section 504 plan, they would also carry a specialized card for that as well. So this does allow for those exceptions. Next slide, please. So again, just a reminder, we were talking about some substantial benefits, not marginal benefits, but substantial benefits from the implementation of these policies, which you can see on this slide. Anxiety levels down, cyberbullying down, stronger friendships and peer connections, increased student participation and focus in class. Next slide, please. And just a couple comments about from the students. You can see they're less stressed, more focused, able to make friends better, and that 75% of students say they actually prefer the device-free environment after an adjustment period. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Next slide, please. And you can see a list of names here on the slide. And I'm actually going to start with the last person there on the slide. Yvonne Xu is the principal at San Mateo High School. And Yvonne, you led the implementation of this policy over the last 4+ years at San Mateo High School. Looking back on that, can you talk about why did you do it? Second, looking back over those 4 years, what do you think has been the most important impacts of the policy? And then what do you feel are the keys to successful, sustained implementation of the policy?
Hi, good evening. San Mateo has been cell phone free this is our 5th year. We started in the 2019-20 school year, and obviously 2020 was interrupted by COVID. I would say the most important thing that we did was to pilot with teachers. One of the schools that was in the video, San Lorenzo High School, was the high school that a group of our teachers visited to see what Yondr was like, much like how members of Santa Clara came over to San Mateo to kind of get the feel and understand what a school environment is like without cell phones. After teachers piloted and gave feedback, we went to the parents to get feedback from them, and I'm sure some of the same concerns that our parents had 5 years ago continue to be concerns with your parents, so I'd be happy to answer those questions later on. Now, I think, looking back, the most important thing is to have buy-in from your teachers. I think, when we did a survey last year, 100% of our teachers said that they wanted to keep Yondr, our cell phone free environment. And, we joke that there are some teachers that would leave teaching if we were ever to get rid of Yondr because they have gotten so used to an environment and where students understand the rules. It's kind of, sometimes there is the nudging where we have to send them down to go get passes or to remind them to Yondr their phones. But students, partake in Yonder checks in different classes. I would say, especially after COVID, when families were clamoring to get their students back at school because they were spending too much time on screens and they really needed those personal connections. I would say on the school campus, before Yonder, students would sit in small circles and be texting each other when they were only 2 or 3 feet away from one another, as opposed to now where our campus is bustling, is lively, students are laughing, talking, looking at each other in the face, getting to see their faces, especially after the little boxes, what we're looking at right now, little boxes on a screen, and then coming back to school when students were masked. So I think it's really important, those connections and looking at students' facial expressions, much of which, we know that bullying and harassment online, when you don't see someone's face or expression or how hurtful certain comments can be, you miss out on a lot of reading body language and facial expressions. And so with Yonder on the school campus, we can tell, what students are doing, even if they might be in the bathroom on their Yonder phone. We know that posture of standing over a cell phone and are often able to just, kind of hold out our hand and they hand over the phone and, it's done. So I would say, teacher buy-in. The 2 teachers that are here today probably would agree that teaching would be a whole different adventure if you had to constantly monitor cell phones and making sure that they're away, because we come across some of those issues now with burner phones, and so teachers really don't have to deal with those type of things. It's a referral to the office, and that is where our teachers want our time to be spent so that they can do their job effectively. I'm not sure if I got all those questions. It was hard to remember them all, but in a nutshell.
Thank you. No, that was great. And in fact, let's go on to Amy Mitchell and Nate Johnson, who are both teachers at San Mateo High School. What have been your biggest realizations about the impact of this policy on the teaching and learning environment? You're teaching and also student learning. And then can you also talk about your role in implementing the policy, like the daily role and responsibility of the classroom teacher? Amy, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So the impact on teaching and student learning, I think someone said it in the video. I want to say it was night and day, but it's just such the norm now that I'm having even a hard time remembering what it was like before Yonder. But it has definitely changed the culture in the classroom. I get to just focus on my lesson and student interaction, and all of that monitoring and suspecting and walking up and down the aisles and looking at kids from all different angles. That is not an issue. And I think it relaxes a lot of students. So I've said this before, I think they're more willing to be risk takers in the room because there's no one recording them. And that just adds to the community of it all. I can also plan lessons without that in my mind. And as far as my role in implementing it, it's quite simple. I mean, I think every teacher will have a learning curve on how they integrate it into their lesson, their daily routines. But as many teachers do, I often have a warm up. And so part of my warm up when students come in and we start is part of the warm up simply says, take out your Yonder. And while they're doing their, warm up activity, whether it be written or talking to a classmate, I'm just walking around saying hello, checking homework, checking in with students, and at the same time picking up their Yonder pouch and just verifying that it's locked. And if anything feels suspicious, I could ask a student to open it and show me, but I have not had that issue in a long time. And I saw in the chat that someone asked, does every teacher have a device for opening it? And in our case, yes. So if I needed to, if I thought it felt more like a calculator than a phone, I could simply just hand over the magnet, have them open it, show me, and then really quickly just put it back and we'd be on our way.
Hi, I'm Nate Johnson. I teach English at San Mateo High School, and I've been teaching since let's see, 1995. So I also am in a unique position in that I've had two of my children go through San Mateo High School. One's a freshman at Davis, and the other one's a freshman at San Mateo right now. So I can speak about kind of the parent perspective also. But as a teacher, I think that the important thing that I've noticed, to echo some of what Amy said, is that it was just a really big cultural shift in the classroom, that we went from being a place where a portion of students were always looking for an opportunity to sneak a peek at their phone, look at their notifications, distract from one thing or another, even for not very long, but just for a microsecond, because they had an itch that there was going to be a message, to an environment where, to the degree that any student is entirely focused on a curriculum, they're focused on the curriculum. They're working in our classes instead of thinking about the outside world. And I think that that's the big shift that happened, is that the world of San Mateo High School became the world during the school hours, as opposed to a place that people were perhaps able to reach out from, or or receive messages from. It's just sort of a self-contained environment in a way that's really positive. I know that as a parent, I've often commented that it's really comforting to know that there aren't any cell phones in locker rooms. It's comforting to know that there are no school hour blasts or posts about something somebody just did in a class. If somebody, in the course of a day does something that people want to talk about, there's hours before anybody can really effectively post about that. And sometimes that diffuses a lot of the energy around such things. In terms of all the questions I think I've fielded during the meetings we've had, all come down to this. I think you don't really know until you know. You don't really understand what it's like until you try it, and it's really transformative. The other thing I would also just end with is just, I was a real skeptic. I was a Yondr skeptic, and I asked many of the same questions that I see in the Q&A, and I'm a convert. There's just no doubt about it. I'm one of those teachers that would probably consider early retirement if suddenly we went back to a cell phone environment.
Nate and Amy, thank you very much, and we may look back to you later. So I want to go to Casey and Vanessa, our two parents here. Maybe Vanessa, we'll start with you. Please share with us what the process was like for you and your child adjusting to a phone-free campus policy. What impact did that have on how the two of you communicated? And what concern did you have at the outset? And how did you deal with those concerns, or how are those concerns addressed over time?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's see. How did he transition or get used to the process of not having a phone when he entered high school? Well, luckily, he came from a middle school where the cell phones were not permitted. So when he started high school, so my son's a senior now, I think it was the first year maybe that the cell phone free environment existed. And he was okay with it. So everything that the presentation mentioned about students liking about not having a cell phone, he totally just agrees with. I just asked him, because before I jumped on the call, I'm like, again, remind me, why is it that you love Yondr? And he's always loved Yondr. It's like, why is it that you love Yondr so much? He's like, Mom, I don't have to worry about being videoed. I can say what I want in classroom and no one's going to record me. He says that he's able to go up to students more without feeling the pressure of them looking at their phone and him trying to get their attention. He felt like he was more focused. He felt like the students were more focused. And again, easier to approach. And anytime that he needed to get a hold of me, so how do I communicate with him? He says he's never had a problem going to the office. Every time I see a phone call from, San Mateo High School, I immediately pick up. And he's like, Mom, I need my gym clothes. I forgot it. Can you drop it off at the office? And the office does an amazing job of getting it to him. Or if he knows that it's going to be there during break, he'll go and get it. Or if I need to get a hold of him, I believe that I've emailed him before. And so sometimes he looks at it, sometimes he doesn't. And honestly, I don't have to communicate with him really tons. And when there's emergencies, whatnot, going on with the school, Yvonne, our principal, does an amazing job of letting the parents know, like, hey, this is what's going on. The kids are fine, no worries. And whenever an event or whatever ends, she again informs us. So I think it's just a matter of communicating with parents. Like, I've never felt like I've needed to call the school and say, oh my God, is my kid safe? So when my son needs me, he calls me and I get to him what he needs. And yeah, so yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Casey, what would you like to add to Vanessa's comments?
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of Vanessa, what she said. And we have a 10th grade daughter, and we also came from a cell phone free school, and she was coming from out of the district. And so there was a lot of anxiety, or not a lot of anxiety, but worry of how am I going to meet new friends. And she just immediately was very excited that students connected with each other in a real way. Whereas before she was worried, if I don't have a phone and, what am I going to do in the downtime, et cetera. I think the biggest, I think your original question was what were we worried about as parents? And I think, yeah, the biggest thing, like Vanessa said, was just how am I going to communicate with my kid? Because I feel like the way modern communication is, things come up last minute. How am I going to get something to her? What if the schedule changes, whatnot? But I think the real value is that, in parenting, always in these changes, when you get a chance to take a step back. And what I realized in this is that she's actually developing better executive functioning skills because she is having to talk to me prior to going to school about what the schedule is for the day. I think it also offered a really wonderful, another surprise was that I realized she was having way more interactions with adults at campus because, like Vanessa said, she has to go to the office and talk to someone if she needed to call me or whatnot. But so I think it's, the worry about how are we going to communicate when things changed, I think it helped us as a family get better in our own communication. And it helped, again, sort of the long-term goals of parenting, of trying to create an individual who can plan ahead and function and work things out on their own. I think the other big concern, which I'm sure is top of mind of a lot of parents, is safety, right? Like, oh, God forbid there's an emergency, and am I going to be able to get in touch with my child? And I'm sure, a safety officer could speak to this, but I think at the end of the day, you really, if there, God forbid, there was a horrible event at the school, you want your kids alert, paying attention, using their own intuition and skills of what's going on. So I think sometimes we get caught up in, oh, this tool is necessary for everything, and it's really a tool. And we want our kids to learn how to focus and use the senses and the good sense that they have in those types of situations. So I think, I think a lot of this is a little bit trust in the process. It is a big change for families and how we communicate together. But I think, as everyone's saying, you find all these wonderful benefits down the line. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate both of you sharing that. And I'm going to turn it now to our safety manager, Michael Harris, to share a little bit more about the safety professional's perspective on this issue of cell phones and emergency or crisis situations. Michael?
Thanks, Brett. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited about Yonder. I think this is a great implementation that Santa Clara Unified's implementing. Just want to give a quick, just a brief history in my background. Been with Santa Clara Unified for about 2 years as a district safety manager. Prior to Santa Clara Unified, I served as Kaiser, Assistant Director of Physical Security and Threat Management, 6 years federal law enforcement, 8 years military, and about 3 years executive protection. So I've served on many different facets, and this is something new. And I appreciate San Mateo inviting us out to your campus to be able to observe how the kids use the Yonder, and I was very impressed. From a safety standpoint, safety and security standpoint, there are some very key considerations with the Yonder. And one of the things that Casey mentioned was the focus and attention during emergencies, ensuring that the students and staff remain attentive and responsive during emergencies. From a safety standpoint, it's very important. I can just tell you just from experience, just having drills and students not on their phone, or the teachers, having to police the phones, the students are more alert and more attentive. Not just for specific emergencies, but also for the drills. Parent communication during emergencies, establishing clear protocols and contacting parents while maintaining safety. This also, for me, just being out at San Mateo High School, it seems like it tends to eliminate any type of disruptions or distractions during emergencies. And that was key for me, for the students to be able to focus on what the teachers are saying, or if law enforcement is present, or if fire is present, instead of pulling out a cell phone for any type of disruptions or distractions. I know in the video, it also talked about reasonable accommodations for medical conditions. So from a risk and a safety standpoint, just coming from that field, we're able to make accommodations for any type of medical conditions, and they can access their phones. And then another thing we talked about was the magnets. So the direction we're going into is not only will they have magnets on the wall for the students on Yonder, but we'll also have magnets in our red bags, just from a safety perspective. So I know a lot of parents wonder about the emergencies and if they have to evacuate, and will I be able to talk to my child? The answer is yes. So the main point is we want your children to focus on the drills and emergencies, listen to the teachers, listen to the directors, make sure they're safe. And then once we get to a safe location, we will have magnets inside of a bag, inside of our emergency bags, where we can on Yonder, and then your children can speak to you. We really want, from a safety perspective, we want to avoid, by Yondering, and me just being new to this, we really want to avoid any type of false information or false narratives being put out there. And we want to give accurate information to the community and to the parents, just to make sure that we're able to reunite the parents with the students. So just from my safety perspective and just going out there and observing the Yonder, those are just some of the really key safety considerations for the Yonder implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And now, last but not least, our student trustee and student senator, Ren Brown. Ren, can you share about the process that our student senate went through, your engagement with the superintendent's student council, and how you arrived at the recommendation to the working group from the student senate, and what that recommendation was?
Yeah, so the idea of these Yonder pouches and issues about the phone got brought to the Student Senate in September. The Student Senate is one representative from each high school. So Brad came in with information about the new California law that was signed, and we noticed issues in our policies from school to school, just talking with a few of us. So with that, we wanted to get more information and more student engagement. So we worked with Chief Brad Stam to do a presentation to student representatives at a superintendent meeting. There's like 60 kids at these meetings. There's 5 representatives from each high school and 5 representatives from the middle schools. So we all come together. We did a presentation about what we've been seeing at the schools about Yonder. We had San Mateo High School kids join over Zoom so the kids could talk to the kids, which was really nice. And we also had the Yonder pouches. We passed those around so the kids got to see them and stuff. And then we went into breakout rooms, which was one student representative and then a bunch of kids from each school. And we asked them questions just to get student representatives so the student senate could talk about it. So most of the things we got was a lot of kids did see benefits, but there was a lot of worries and kids having the same ideas that parents do, like, well, kids are going to work around it and these kinds of things. So we made, with the stuff we got from all the kids, we made a report to the mobile device committee, and our report had all the information about what the students, their opinions, their benefit, like the benefits of the Yonder and what they didn't like. And with that, we had recommendations to the committee from the students. We had recommendations like for students that aren't English based, that they use the phones for translations. We wanted to have support for them. We wanted the teachers and staff to also be good role models, not using their phones with this students having to lock their phones up. We wanted to have areas that kids could use their phone, contact the parents like in the office or if in like the wellness center, areas like that. We wanted to make sure some classes you could on Yonder your phone, because we have classes in our district like leadership and yearbook that go on social media and post for the students and things that they would need their phones for. We also saw issues that our district is very advanced. So we use QR codes for everything, and for paying for things, a lot of kids use tap to pay. So I wanted to make sure we knew about that and make sure kids had a way of paying and getting access to those things. And then we also wanted to have special days for students to have that there is no Yonder, just to help with the process and the change. So it was more focusing on rewarding the students and penalizing the students. And our idea for this was days that weren't just free days, but there were days that there was things going on. So in our district, we have dress up days, or we have homecoming and things like that. So kids can take pictures with their friends, but there's still events that the kids will still socialize. So hopefully they won't be on their phone the whole lunch and still be socializing with their friends. So that's kind of what the student senate kind of went through our process. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to compliment, Ren, you on your leadership and that of the Student Senate. It was an incredibly well-written, well-developed and thought through report to the working group. So thank you again for your fearless leadership in this. I'm looking through the Q&A, and there's definitely a bunch of questions about kind of how do kids kids kind of get around it, try and hack it. And we have Adina Traeger from Yonder here, and I wanted her to be able to answer that. But first, before you do that, and welcome Adina, I wanted to go back to Yvonne. Yvonne, there's some questions here about what if students forgot to bring their Yonder pouch? What's the mechanism, or what if they don't have a cell phone at all? How do you account for that? And then also, if a student is like willfully defying this and having their phone out or whatnot, how does the school address that?
There we go.
Oh, sorry. Oops. Can you unmute, Yvonne? I'm sorry. Try again. There you go.
I thought I was unmuted, but we still do have some students that don't have cell phones, and so we give them a consideration card. It still does mean they have a Yonder pouch because all students are given a Yonder pouch. So when they do a check, they still have it out on their desk, but they will have a little card in a clear window on the Yonder pouch so that a teacher can check that a student does not have a cell phone. We can give those out at any time during the school year. So a student might start out the year without a cell phone, but eventually get one, or a parent might punish a student and take away their cell phone and let us know so that we give them a consideration card. Students who forget their pouches come down to our student services window and they turn in their phones. I think you saw our high-tech way of collecting phones. We take a piece of blue tape and a Sharpie marker and write their name on this piece of blue tape, put it on the phone, and then it goes in to a Yondr bag, and then it's locked up in our cabinet until either a parent pickup or end of school day when the student comes to pick up their phone on their way to the bus or walking home. We have other consideration cards, like you mentioned, for medical conditions. We have students that have heart ailments, that have diabetes, that need to check apps on their phones. And so they are given a consideration card to be allowed to be unyondered or unyonder at any time in order to check that. And so we've never had a student abuse, that privilege or do anything like that. They're usually, you can't even tell because they'll either do it right in front of you just to check, and then the phone is away again. We do have consequences after a certain amount of times that a student has either forgotten their phone or forgotten their pouch. But if they turn in their phone very willingly and we turn it on and off and make sure it's not a burner phone, we usually give it back, no consequence at all, because they're being very honest about turning in their phones. But we do on occasion have students put a burner phone in their Yondr, which is a non-working phone, in case you don't know what a burner phone is. And I did see kind of a comment about a calculator. A calculator is in the shape of a phone. We've had everything from granola bars to, I think the worst was a potato that has been stuck in a Yondr pouch to pass for that. And, they're given consequence. We confiscate their phone, we'll do a search. Sometimes teachers will have a sixth sense and ask us to do a Yondr check in their classroom where we'll uncover, a student having 2 phones, and then the administration will deal with it. And they are not indestructible. If students really feel like they have to have their phone, they can squeeze their fingers in and pop it open. You don't have to have superhuman strength. But, we do notice when they are broken. The first one is free, otherwise they have to pay a fine, and they are given another Yondr pouch. If they forget on the weekend, some students will cut it open and then just be like, I forgot to come by. But, usually admin, if it's basketball season, football season, we are usually here on campus on Friday until, 9 o'clock at night. And so if a student really, could come back to school and find us, we could unyonder their phone before the weekend starts. And, sometimes as a consequence, parents will leave their phones with us for, the weekend or weeks at a time. And then release the phone, at the appropriate time.
Great. I did want to also mention, thank you, Yvonne, that this will be a district-wide implementation. This is not at one school versus another school. And we will be training all staff on how the system operates, because multiple people in the school have a role in supporting it. And really everyone in the school plays a role in successfully supporting this. Adina, welcome from Yondr. I wanted you to speak specifically to this issue of the hackability of the magnets and all of this, because parents are hearing from kids in other districts, you can just slam it on the concrete, or you can buy a magnet off of Amazon, or all of this stuff. So can you just talk about what, steps Yondr's been taking to address those questions?
Yeah, so over the past 2 years, we have been updating our product. So that is something to keep in mind, that we have been updating it. A lot of videos that are seen are in reference like previous product or things like that. So that is just something important to keep in mind. We are just constantly looking at how to make it better. And that's something we're really investing in as a company. We find that it's really, kind of to Yvonne's point, it's a cloth pouch, right? So it's really about the policy behind it and how we're supporting students navigating with that. And so that's something we help districts with as well. What our goal is for any damage to be intentional, right? So we're giving every student a pouch, we're asking them to be responsible, we're holding them to that expectation. And then if they make a choice to do something intentional to damage the pouch, then that's when the follow-up will happen. And we see it at pretty low rates across California. So we're talking about like 5% maybe within the first 2 months of damage. So that's a pretty low rate when you think of like the entirety of a school, or even just other things that we give students all the time. I used to be a high school special ed teacher, and half the things I gave them, I would get back in not great working conditions. So along those lines. Does that help, Brad?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. And one of the things too, that was really impressed me at San Mateo was just watching the student interaction during brunch and lunch, and how much they were actually interacting with each other and not looking down in their laps or not texting. They were laughing, making noise, playing games. And to me, I guess, of course, there are going to be students who may try and flout the rules or get away with having a phone, but they're going to stick out, it seems to me, like because their behavior is going to be different in a way. And I have to imagine that word will get out to a certain point that so-and-so is using their phone consistently or showing it off. So to me, I wonder, like, once you reach a certain percentage, that it's kind of a self-managing system to some extent, because the kids are valuing the positive culture changes that they're participating in. Nate, I saw you had your hand up. Would you like to chime in here?
Yeah, I think what happens during this transition process is that everybody thinks about the what if questions. They think about the exceptions, and they don't keep in mind that essentially what you're doing is establishing a cultural shift. And the default behavior at San Mateo High School is no cell phone. And to echo your thought, it's really unusual, very, very unusual to have a student with a cell phone. They have to go to the office. The teacher has to explicitly say, everybody knows when a kid has a cell phone out. And the exceptions that you could imagine, they just don't come up as often as you think. We just don't have to deal with cell phones. It's just a change that happened, and now we don't even think about it. It's just in the background, and the habits and the routines that teachers have might need some finessing or some detailing, with training, and the students might need a transition period, but it doesn't take long. And once it's in place, it's just a different kind of school.
Right. Well, thank you. A couple questions that came up in the chat, and also just any of the panelists, please raise your hand if you have something that you would like to contribute as well. There's concern about how much variation is there going to be across classrooms and schools. Our goal is that there is minimal variation, that this is being implemented consistently, every classroom, every school in the district. And this would be for implementation beginning the first day of the next school year. We have developing plans to pilot in a couple schools this spring, in the month of April, before testing, to be able to learn from this experience and give other staff the opportunity to go and observe as well. For elementary schools, there's a question about what grade levels. So we have an elementary group that's going to be meeting at the end of February, but this will apply to all grade levels in the district. And frankly, we are going to be encouraging elementary schools to just ask that students not bring any devices with them, or if the parent really insists that they do, that they will be provided pouches, like the older students as well, and we'll need to manage those pouches. Smartwatches, AirPods can go into the pouches. Tablets and MacBooks are not, personal tablets and MacBooks we are proposing that they not be allowed, that students not be allowed to bring them with them. We know it creates an equity issue, and we are a one-to-one Chromebook issued district. If a teacher wants students to use professional cameras for a photography course or something like that, of course, those would be allowed, just like student access to higher end computers in the coding classes or graphic design classes or media classes. Those devices will be provided in those classes for students to access. We are still working on some of the details around field trips, after school events, all of that, working that through. Be interested in any, insights from San Mateo about that. And if you know what your fellow middle schools are doing around after school events and field trips, because I know those are two questions that have come up here in Q&A. Anyone want to jump in?
So after school events, like students can be unyondered. So at, football games, basketball games, they, are unyondered. Interestingly enough, like, I think, I've been to enough basketball games in this past couple of weeks that, students aren't really down looking at their phones. I think they have gotten used to, like, when you're on campus, you're not on your phone. And so they are much more, I believe, engaged in what's happening around them. Of course, you have those kids that come and they're looking down at their phones, but for the most part, I think they're pretty engaged. At dances, like they want to come because they're taking a bunch of pictures and things like that. But it's not like the constant, appendage in their hand, like they have them, but I think it's a little bit less, where before they, like vloggers, they'd be walking around talking, their arms extended, walking into people that, they do their photos, but then they're engaged in jumping around, the dance floor and, just being, kids and having fun without that fear of being, videoed and then bullied or harassed like later on. We see very little of that, thankfully.
We had a couple other questions. Thank you for that. One is about coaches and PE teachers, coaches changing or canceling practice times at the last minute. How do you navigate the whole after-school athletics communication challenge?
The good old-fashioned way, PA announcements in the school. So our athletic director will get a notice, and then he'll either come to the office or G-chat me, and then we'll make an announcement over, the PA system. Some of our students might have not at school periods towards the end of the day, and then coaches will like send out a text. And so when they, unyonder, they'll be able to see that notification. But most of the time, we will do it the old-fashioned way and use a PA announcement. But we do encourage the coach to also send a text, just in case the students have already left campus because of their not at school period.
If a parent really needs to reach their child during the day and they call the office, does the student typically come down to the office to make the call, and do they unyonder in the office, or would the teacher let them unyonder and like step out of the class and talk to their parent, or what's your practices around that?
I think I've seen both, like students have come to the office and say, can I call my mom? And then we're like, here's the phone. They hang up, and then they move on their way. Sometimes in class, like I have seen, students, in the hallway, not very often, on the phone, and they'll be like, oh, I had to take a call because a family member's in the hospital and they were waiting for a call or something like that. So it can go either way, because teachers have magnets in their classroom. All the offices do as well. It's really at the discretion of a teacher. A teacher might have a Kahoot, might have a class assignment where they need to be unyondered, where we've had classes walking around campus, taking pictures of things, or videotaping a skit, or, doing something else, making a recording of themselves. So they have discretion in order to do that. We only ask if they're walking around campus that they notify us ahead of time so that we understand what's going on, instead of, running into a student who's innocently, doing their schoolwork and we're kind of like, what are you doing with your phone out? You know, or let's go to the office or something like that. So the conversation has started very differently, you know, in terms of like, oh, what class are you with? Oh, okay, I got it. You're one of the classes that's, you know, doing a project.
Yvonne, can I also ask you a follow-up question? We have a couple, one I just wanted to clarify. We had at least one of our attendees was wondering if this is implemented at the high school level, so clarification on that. And then also, what is the end of the school day? So if we go bell to bell, how long does it take for all of your students to unyonder at the end of the day?
It's not like they're lining up outside. So our school day begins at 8:30 and on Mondays it ends at 3:45. On Wednesdays and Fridays, it ends at 2:50, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:30. So because all of our teachers have yonders in their classroom, it's just a matter of each teacher unyondering as kids walk out the door. And so literally it takes seconds. It doesn't take very long at all. They know how to, you know, tap and go, tap and go, tap and go, as easy as, you know, contactless payment.
I would add too, so for even schools that do pouch and unpouch at the entrances, which is what some of our schools do. So San Mateo is a high school, and then feeding into that is San Mateo Foster City School District. And a lot of those students do just unpouch as they're leaving. And we hear the same thing. It's very, very quick. Under 5 minutes, everyone's getting out. Students become the experts at it, as Yvonne mentioned. So it's really, really fast.
Well, this brings us to the end of our webinar. I want to deeply, deeply thank all of our panelists for donating your time to our webinar and helping Santa Clara Unified on its journey. This is an information session. Our next step in the process is we will have the elementary focus work group meeting on February 25th. And then the board policy subcommittee is meeting on March 6th. And they will determine whether or not this gets advanced to the board, full board for first reading on March 13th and for action on March 27th. Assuming the board approves the updates to the policy, we will then begin the focus on implementation in April and May, getting ready for full district implementation next school year. So if you didn't get a chance, you know, to get your question answered, we will go over all of the Q&A and make sure that it gets addressed in the FAQ. You can also email me directly at bstam@scusd.net, and I'll do my best to get your question answered. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great evening. Appreciate everyone's contribution. Thanks, Jen, for co-hosting, and we'll see you all at some point in the future, no doubt, on this yonder journey from over yonder. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night.